On this week's Back of the Grid, we're going to be looking at another Verstappen versus Norris fight for the win, whether McLaren really should have won this one, and a look ahead to the Austrian Grand Prix. So let's go. Hello everyone and welcome to Back of the Grid. I am Chris, not leaving Tom on his own this week. Stellar job last week steering the ship on your own, Tom. We very much appreciate that.
I tried.
Stu is...
Stu's still not here, but I have also just realised as I looked at myself, I'm wearing the exact same top as last time, so people probably think I'm just stuck in this room now doing nothing but the podcast. I'm just stuck here forever.
You can leave.
Yeah. I just realised.
Actually, I'm wearing a sort of purplish shirt today as well. We're very on brand this week. Yeah,
exactly. We're on brand.
But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the Spanish Grand Prix, which was decent enough, I think.
It was okay.
It was all right. It showed some promise that didn't quite pan out as it could have done. But still, given Spanish Grand Prix we've had in years gone by, it was still much improved. But the last couple of years have been really good, actually. So it's funny how since they've made the change to the track that everybody's been asking for about a decade, suddenly it's producing better races. Really weird, isn't it, that?
Yeah, funny coincidence that, isn't it?
Yeah. But yeah, we'll get into it. And it was another Verstappen versus Norris fight for the win, which is sort of becoming the theme of this season now after a few races of Verstappen dominance early on. I can't help feeling like the result was kind of decided off the line, though. Norris dropping from pole down to third behind Russell and Verstappen. Verstappen managed to get past Russell pretty quickly, but Norris took quite a long time. And overtaking in general seemed to be much more of a struggle for the McLaren in this race. I guess the setup just didn't quite have the straight line speed. Plus, they'd made the DRS zone a bit shorter this year as well, which didn't help matters for Norris.
Yeah, and I think, I know we're talking specifically, I guess, about Verstappen and Norris at the minute, but I think Russell's strategy kind of dropped him out of that fight. He'd have probably still been in and around it to some degree if he'd have maybe gone with a different strategy, because the hards didn't work for him, did they? And obviously we saw Lewis on the podium in George's stead, and had it gone the other way strategy wise for George, that would have probably been his third place, I think, realistically. So whether he could have taken a fight to Verstappen with a bit of different strategy, I don't know, probably not. But it's good to see what is effectively three teams there fighting for the podium, and Ferrari, albeit weren't ridiculously close, but they were in contention for it. Was it Sainz that was pushing Russell at the end for the fourth place, or was it Leclerc? I can't remember which of them it was.
Leclerc in the end.
Was it Leclerc? But yeah, they were close enough, essentially. I think that it showed that it's three, maybe four teams that are potentially going to be able to vie for podiums at different races, which is promising. It's promising in the sense that Ferrari have kind of ultimately bounced back quite quickly from what we saw last time out, and it's also positive that Mercedes have kind of kept the form that it looked like they might have found after last time out. So, that looks promising, and then McLaren are just kind of continuing on as they have been. So that's it's really good.
Really closing up. But yeah, obviously Norris was it took him a while to get past Russell. I can't remember exactly how many laps it was, but certainly a lot longer than it took Verstappen. He then stayed out longer and had tyre advantage, but as a result had to pass Sainz, Hamilton and Russell on track, which was about 13 laps, so obviously losing time there as well. He also had a comparatively slow pit stop, which lost him a second or so. In the end, the gap was 2.2 seconds at the line. I don't doubt that Verstappen probably could have made that gap bigger if he had wanted to, or he could have stretched it out if he needed to, had Norris caught him quicker. But if you look back over that race, you can see several points where Norris could have gained several seconds. Like, you know, had he stayed a position or two higher off the line, had he got past Russell quicker, had he not had to fight with again, Russell in particular, like Sainz and Hamilton, he got past relatively quickly, but Russell really put up a fight. You know, and you look at all these points where Norris could actually have made up time, and suddenly that Verstappen win looks a lot less sure. The McLaren is right up there. I almost think that I'm not going to say this as a thing I think is definitely happening, but I think a sort of hypothesis I think we can start considering at this point in the season is that McLaren may actually have the fastest car now, and it's Verstappen that's the difference at the moment. Because if you look at the results of, especially when you take Piastri and Perez into account as well, that McLaren looks as quick, if not quicker, than the Red Bull, I think. And it's only the speed and consistency of Verstappen, because once again he didn't he had one slight off, I think, didn't he? Like he ran a wheel into the gravel once, but basically it was faultless. And as Wes in Discord pointed out, like, you know, Lando put it on pole. Like, I think over one lap it's next to nothing between the two of them. They're so close now. It's so cool and so unexpected after where the season started.
And like you say, when you compare like Piastri to Perez, Piastri was 20 seconds down the road from Perez in the end, something like that. Like a decent amount of time down the road from him anyway. So there was like a jump there. I can't remember if there was anything that affected that or if that was just Perez's pace. I can't even remember.
So Perez, I'm going to double check this before I say it for certain. But yeah, Perez did a 3-stopper, not a 2-stopper.
Which is odd for Perez, isn't it? Because we always used to praise Perez. Here we go. Praise Perez for his Pirelli management. Wait. Praise Perez for his Pirelli productivity. I'm trying to make this as hard a tongue twister as I possibly can.
But even so, he was 26 seconds down on Piastri at the end.
26 in the end, okay.
Yeah, which is about a pit stop delta, possibly more than a pit stop. It's actually quite a short pit lane in Barcelona, isn't it, actually, since they...
Yeah, it's probably, I don't know the exact figure, but I'd say like 15 to 20 seconds lost, maybe.
Yeah, maybe 18 tops. And once again, it was almost a minute off Verstappen. And obviously they had very different races, but still, that's such a gap. But yeah, like, it's so good to see such a close fight at the front, especially going into Austria, where I think it's going to be even closer. And Silverstone, where obviously McLaren led for a good chunk of the race last year.
I mean, think about how close we've had qualifying sessions so far this season, and then think back to how close Austrian qualifying sessions are in general because of how short the lap is. Like, it's going to be tight. Like, I know we'll get to this eventually, but it is going to be tight this weekend, I think, coming up. Very tight.
Yeah. The saving grace for Verstappen from a championship point of view is that his nearest challenger has chopped and changed quite a bit. So second place has now switched from Leclerc to Norris. He's 69 points behind Verstappen, which we're not halfway through the season yet. That's not an insurmountable gap.
It's 3 race wins, isn't it? 3 retirements.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not for a second going to suggest that I think Verstappen's going to lose this title, because I don't. But Constructors is wide open. As things currently go, I have my doubts that Red Bull are going to get the Constructors this year. I mean, what's the gap now in the Constructors?
Good question, I can tell you. So I've got the standings up in front of me. 60 points. Red Bull on 330, Ferrari on 270, and McLaren are then behind them on 237. So just 93 points back to McLaren in third and 60 points to Ferrari in second.
In terms of Constructors, that's not much at all. You can rack up points very quickly in the Constructors.
Well, I mean, as Sarah's very conveniently just dropped in the Discord chat, look at how many of those points Verstappen has actually racked up in the last 4 races.
Yeah.
83 of those 330 points of Verstappen in the last 4 races. 8 are Sergio Perez. for perspective. So out of 95 points, that is 83 of them were scored by Verstappen. And that includes him having an absolutely torrid time in Monaco as well.
Yeah.
Imagine if like the Red Bull was on pace there, you'd be talking like 100 points essentially for Verstappen if they'd been on form there as well.
Yeah. And, like Perez isn't beating his teammates. He's not beating the McLarens or the Ferraris. And now he's not able to beat the Mercedes as well. Now they've got a bit of resurgence. Yeah, it's not good enough from a constructor's point of view. But as you said before, I don't think Red Bull care nearly as much about that. So,
yeah.
Speaking of Mercedes, their second 3-4 finish in a row, comfortably ahead of Ferrari again in qualifying and on race pace. Yeah. Great drives from both drivers as well. George Russell led 2 races in a row, which is not a thing I thought we'd be saying this season. He, as you alluded to earlier, he did the soft, medium, hard strategy when most of the people at the front did soft, medium, soft, and that hurt him towards the end. The hards weren't really the tyre to be on, so that cost him. Hamilton, best race of the season for him, I think.
Best result.
Certainly the best result. I think his best drive as well. His first podium of the season as well. Super strong drive. Like, he looked really racy. He seemed to look after his tyres really well. He had really good pace at the end to pass Russell and pull away from the Ferraris behind. So really impressed with them.
Yeah, strong.
Ferrari again, fourth best car all weekend. They brought it on 5th and 6th. The sort of long sustained corners of Barcelona seemed to be where they were particularly losing time. And then it didn't help that they were just around each other all the time and managed to make contact really early in the
they were
race.
Tripping over each other a little bit, weren't they? I think.
And they both were pretty annoyed by it afterwards as well. Leclerc said that they were both supposed to be saving tyres at that point, and he thought Sainz was wanting to have a little bit of home race glory and not saving his tyres for a lap to make a move, and he sort of went in a bit too hot, and that's why they made contact. Sainz just said Leclerc complains too much and that he was doing the right thing at that point. I find Sainz's complaints about the making contact a little hard to swallow when then his complaints about Leclerc moaning all the time when he was then later in the race moaning about the way Hamilton overtook him.
Yeah.
And it was come along. Why'd you make of that Ferrari incident?
It's very much a driver on his way out and just in it for himself, I think. As much as I like Sainz, there was 100%, I think, an element in that move of a driver who obviously knows he's leaving. We've known that for a long time. He's at his home Grand Prix and he's just thinking to himself, I want to finish as best as I can in front of my home fans in my home race.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make the move if I can make the move, and maybe chopped Leclerc a little bit sooner than he needed to. Not egregiously so that I'm saying, he deserved a penalty or anything. I think the way it played out is fine. But it just, very much sort of smacked us. I'm not here next season. I don't need to keep any of you happy. So I'm doing it for me in this occasion. And to be fair to Sainz, generally speaking, despite him being given the boot effectively for next season, he still generally played the team game for the most part from what I've seen. So I can sort of forgive that attitude a little bit in front of the home crowd. That element is, and so I'm not going to completely slag him off for it essentially, but it was just a little bit of that creeping in, I think, maybe.
But if you watch the onboards of the Sainz passing Leclerc and then the onboard of Hamilton passing Sainz, albeit slightly different because it was an overtake around the outside versus the inside.
Yeah.
The amount of space given to the driver on the inside is pretty identical in both of them. And I think we were discussing in the Discord during the race, and it's like there's a difference between being given the amount of space you would like to have and the amount of space you are legally obliged to have. And I think that's maybe where some of the complaints are coming from.
There's an element of that, let's say, in the start as well with Norris's defence. Like, Norris was very close to being in trouble for how far he pushed Verstappen across, but he borderline left a car's width, like legally what he had to leave just about, like within a few centimetres or so. And it is a case of like, maybe Verstappen went a little bit too like avoiding and got further on the grass than he needed to, and it all looks a bit more dramatic than it actually was. But it's the same sort of thing, isn't it? Like there's how much room you need to legally, by the rules, leave someone, and there's how much room that driver wants to be left for their own purposes. So I think all that, like with Hamilton and Sainz, I think maybe even with Sainz and Leclerc, like it was a little bit of a seeing a bit, mate, kind of almost just a little nudge, just like to let him know he's not gonna just sit back and let Leclerc get results over him if he doesn't have to. I think it all just boils down to racing drivers being racing drivers and basically going for, I'm going to push this to the absolute limit I can without getting in trouble, which is essentially a racing driver's job for the most part, isn't it? Like we've seen it for years with the white lines and all that kind of stuff, and what they do when they leave the track and how they rejoin it, all that kind of stuff is they will always attempt to push it literally as far as they can without getting a penalty for it. So I think that all these things are just kind of around that kind of vibe.
Quick word on Piastri, who had a pretty rough weekend based on his standards from the last couple of seasons. He had his worst qualifying result of the season after he went off on his only Q3 lap. And then he only improved a couple of places to finish 7th. He didn't seem that comfortable in the car all weekend when his teammate was off getting pole and chasing down the victory. So disappointing one for him, but I feel like it was kind of just a setup thing that he never quite got it in the window he wanted. But
maybe so. I mean, everyone's entitled to those weekends, aren't they? Like it just happened, and alluded to it before. Like, look at where Red Bull were in Monaco. Like, even what you would say is arguably the best car driver combo on the grid struggled in a particular setup. So I wouldn't hold it too much against Piastri or anything like that. And I think he's just got to kind of learn from it, I guess. Like, take away from it what he can. He's not gone backwards in the race like some people may have. Like, he's still earned a couple of places back, I think, didn't he, in the end? So
he did.
Not complete disaster, but when your teammate is that close to the race winner, who's like having a dominant season, I use quotes there because when you think about how close people actually are, it's not results wise. Yes, it seems dominant. It depends on how you look at it, doesn't it? Points wise, yes, it's dominating, but with how close people are actually getting to them on a race by race basis, it's not like pure dominance, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I think when your teammate's that close to the race winner in that scenario, there probably is a little bit of an element of sort of, where have I gone wrong? What can I do better? Kind of thing. But he's a pretty versatile kid. I'm sure he'll bounce back from it.
But much like we often say about Red Bull, I think McLaren would have had a much easier time of this race had Norris had a rear gunner to make life more difficult strategically for Red Bull. So
maybe
if we are going to have some proper fights for the rest of this season, they do need him up there for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
We've already spoke a bit about Perez. He actually had his best qualifying result in 4 races, which was still only P8, which is grim on its own. Obviously, had that grid penalty from last race, so he drops at 11th, climb back up to 8th. We've already said not really good enough, but there we go.
I mean, it still brings me around to this question, right? We talk about how it's not good enough, but it does always make me sit and think, does it just demonstrate how much extra Verstappen can get out of a car? Are we just at that point? Like, I don't know what it is about Perez's... Like, I feel like this is why it feels like Perez drops off over a season, is that over time, essentially, they start the season, like, kind of understand the car about the same amount, and just over time, race after race, Verstappen is finding, like, here's a way I can exploit and get more speed out of the car. Here's a way I can exploit it. Here's a way I can exploit it. Perez just stays exactly the same. So it's actually not that he's dropping off, per se. It's that everybody else is improving around Perez, and Perez is kind of just constant, maybe. I don't know. But I feel like when we keep seeing it year on year, and we're also seeing the other teams start to close in on Max, and Max having to actually fight for these wins a little bit, it does start to make me think, like, is it that is actually where the car is with just an okay middle of the pack driver in it, and Max is just getting that much more out of it. I mean, I'm not going to sit and preach about like Max and certain drivers' driving styles here, because it's not the time or the place for it. If you want to know anything about what I'm talking about, go and watch videos like Driver 61 and all the people like that on YouTube who analyze it and like look at comparisons between Verstappen's driving style, Vettel's driving style from when he was at Red Bull, Schumacher's driving style. There's like a consistency between the way that they all drove and how they ended up so much faster than the rest of the pack for being able to exploit the car in different ways to everybody else and almost compromise the setup but get more out of it and find the balance. And maybe it's not that Perez is actually doing as bad as we think with the car, and it is just that Max is that fast in it. Maybe.
Yeah. But back to my question earlier of like, is the McLaren actually the faster race car now? Like, I think we'll maybe see the answer to that over the next few races.
We need some sort of like exhibition event where every driver has to drive one of the other cars, like at the end of the season, and we find out like Max is still P1 but he's in the Alpine. I mean, that's never going to happen, but like just for like hypothetical sake, like you end up in some other car, or everyone gets to go in the championship winning car or something and gets to set a lap time or something like that.
Time trial
to see time trial in the championship winning car, just so everyone can have a little pop in it, like some kind of exhibition event. And then you like the Top Gear test track where they all used to drive the reasonably priced car, the whatever it was. I can't remember what it was, JC or something or whatever it was.
I feel like if you let Lewis Hamilton have a go in Max Verstappen's Red Bull, he'd probably stick it in the wall out of spite.
Take this to the cost cap.
Oops, what a terrible shame.
Yeah, be interesting.
Where do we get to?
Alpine, maybe next?
Alpine, who sort of continue to improve. Second race in a row, they've had a double points finish. They've moved up ahead of Haas now into 7th place. They stayed well away from each other on the track, which is always good for them. But yeah, 9th and 10th again. Fairly solid. I sort of feel like that result is in many ways helped by other teams really faltering this weekend. But still, Alpine didn't, and that's...
Yeah, it was better than I thought. I mean, I genuinely thought that with the likes of Ferrari being back up in the top 10 and stuff like that, that I genuinely thought they'd struggle to get points, if I'm totally honest. But they're proving that they're moving in the right direction, I think, with a result like that, to be in the points like they were, and having basically everyone that's expected to be ahead of them in the positions that you'd not necessarily in the positions you'd expect them to be, but you'd got the McLarens, the Mercedes, one of the Red Bulls, and the 2 Ferraris, and then they're essentially coming in behind that pack of cars, aren't they? So yeah, I think it's was it 9th and 10th for them in the end, actually?
9th and 10th,
yeah. So Perez, Perez got past Gasly quite late on, I think, didn't he, if I remember right?
Yes.
So, yeah, like, but I think that just shows where Alpine have gotten to if that is the case, that they're actually kind of holding off a Red Bull for portions of a race,
Yeah.
regardless of what we think of Perez.
Speaking of Alpine, they are having a test day at Paul Ricard this week, where Jack Doohan and Mick Schumacher are going to be driving, which sounds an awful lot like assessing their options for next year.
Doesn't it indeed?
Last couple of teams to clean up. Aston Martin had their worst race of the season and the second race in a row without points. Just seems to be going backwards again. They said the track really exposed the weaknesses in their car, but they've also basically said there's no updates on the horizon. So I think this packed period before the summer break is going to be pretty miserable for Aston Martin.
Yeah, I mean, not quite what I was alluding to when I was sat here last week, but one of the storylines I kind of said is, who's going to risk what on upgrades going into a 3-race stint, and then effectively what is 5 races in 6 weeks. Like, it's a long period to go, and it's going to be difficult to be bringing upgrades in the midst of that when you've got so much travel and such tight deadlines getting between circuits. I mean, yes, fair enough, they're all in Europe. They're not miles and miles. Well, they are miles and miles apart. They're not like flyaway races. It's a lot easier to get between them. It's a lot easier to get something out from Enster or wherever you might be based in the UK, Silverstone, out to these races. Yes, it is easier, but the time and the toll that takes on a team to get it out to Austria, to put something on it, to run it is, ideally they wanted to be putting something in place for Spain, in my opinion, and being able to just run it and understand it for 3 races. I feel like Aston Martin have not taken advantage of that, and they're now going to suffer for 3 races. Like, looking at that performance, I genuinely can't see where they'll claw that back over the next at least 2 races that we've got.
No, not at all.
They're going to struggle for a good couple of races, if not more.
I mean, we always say that this track is like a real test, like all-round test of a car. And, there's a reason one of the many reasons they go testing there. And the same was true of RB and Williams, who were both like very much had the weaknesses of their cars showing up. I mean, those 2 teams have gone from both sort of in around the bottom end of the points for a few races now to rooted to the bottom for most of the weekend. The only highlight really was Ricciardo, who actually managed to finish ahead of Bottas and Magnussen, as well as the Tsunoda and the Williams. So I think he did the best job of them, but still he was working with a pretty miserable car there.
Yeah.
Choose some awards.
Yeah, why don't we?
Driver of the day. I mean, the official F1 driver of the day went to Lando Norris again, because that just seems to be the theme now. Personally, I don't think Lando Norris should be anywhere near driver of the day, because
I mean, he had a good stint playing a slightly different. He managed the tyres well to play a slightly different strategy to bring himself back into it. So I don't think I can see where it's come from. Essentially, like, people are going who's given Max a bit of a run for his money, basically, is what they've gone for there. And I think it's fair, but I mean,
can't help feeling like he fluffed a chance at winning that race.
There's a bit of a smudge on it, isn't there?
Yeah,
it's the start scuppers it, and just like those little bits, like we talked about before, of maybe taking a little bit longer than he could have to get past Russell, which ultimately maybe cost him an actual fight with Verstappen in the closing laps. Like, just little bits like that. It's not a drive of the day, I don't think. It's close, but it's not quite. I mean, I'd be tempted in some way to say either Lewis or Max, if I'm completely honest.
Lewis was on my mind, to be honest. I think he maximised that race.
He maximised it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Lewis and George both did a really, really good job. I think if of the 2 of them, I'd probably go Lewis just based on the fact that he finished ahead of the two of them.
And I guess George's was a strategy thing, which wasn't entirely his fault. I mean, it could have maybe suggested that he didn't want to do the strategy, but
I think
it always work, does it? Teams don't always listen.
At that point.
Yeah. He might have not had a choice, to be fair.
Yeah. An honourable mention that's coming from Sarah in the Discord, which I wanted to mention this podcast actually, was in Formula 2, Juan Manuel Correa,
yes.
who you may recognise his name because he was involved in the crash at Spa that took Antoine Hubert's life, and he got back on the F2 podium for the first time in almost exactly 5 years to the day.
Not far off, is it?
Yeah, so that was real nice to see. So definitely a mention for him.
Is it that long since that accident already?
I think it was 5 years since his last podium.
Oh, I was going to say,
but actually, it might be 5 years since that.
I don't know if it's that far. I feel like it was after COVID. I want to say it's 5 years since. I want to say it's 5 years since the podium.
Yeah, that's right.
But regardless, it's great to see him back there. And I mean, maybe it was the same season. To be fair, maybe he got the podium, and then later in the season at Spa is obviously where the accident happened. So yeah, it will be.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. It's been that long.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Crazy.
I think I like Hamilton. I think I can go Hamilton.
That was easy then.
Hamilton it is. What about move of the day?
I mean, after Russell's start, I was kind of just sat there watching the rest of the race thinking, right, who's going to do something to beat this? There was...
I thought Verstappen's pass on Russell for the lead was very, very nice. It was very aggressive, but also very clean, put him exactly where he wanted him.
Yeah.
Because Hamilton's move on Sainz was very good as well, where he kind of he sort of made Sainz defend to the inside, but then still dove to the inside to get the inside line. There was a little bit of contact, but that was still a very good move, I thought.
Who went round the outside of someone, kind of turn 3 or 4?
Well, we had Norris and Russell.
Was it that the battle going back and
the
forth?
whole first sector side by side. Yeah, that was really good.
That sort of stuck out for me as being something that, because I like that. I mean, sometimes I can move of the day to something that's a bit of back and forth over multiple corners, and sometimes it ends up with the driver that was behind actually taking the place. Sometimes it ends up being that the driver ahead's defended. I'm not necessarily focusing this on the outcome. It's more like what we saw that was just a great piece of driving. So whether that be a bit of wheel-to-wheel combat or an overtake, it's not specifically an overtake move. So I think that little bit of Norris and Russell through the first sector stood out for me as an alternative to Russell's start.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, how much of Russell's start do you think is down to Verstappen and Norris squabbling?
A decent chunk of it, I think. I definitely think they were looking at each other and not really paying attention to what Russell was doing.
So do you think that makes the Norris and Russell back and forth, wheel-to-wheel racing better because it was truer, so to speak?
Possibly. Although, to be honest, having just had a little scrub through and watched some of these, I don't think either of them are my favourite.
Oh, okay.
If I'm completely honest with you.
Where are you going now, then?
I think I like Hamilton's move on Sainz the most.
Yeah? Even though Sainz didn't like it?
Well, I don't care what Carlos Sainz thinks.
Obviously. I mean...
I know it's going to obsess a lot of people because the Discord were pretty unanimously at the start, that George Russell's got move of the day, job done. But I really like that Hamilton move.
Well, that scuppers my idea. And there's only 2 of us. There isn't a deciding vote.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what to do in this situation. What do we do in this situation?
Well, what are you going for?
I mean, I want to go for Norris and Russell back and forth.
So between us and Discord, we've got 3 different options.
The Discord want to... Discord have to decide between ours. They have to decide between Norris and Russell back and forth or Hamilton on Sainz. Whichever one the random people... Right. Oh, no, they're tying it. They're just vertically even votes on that. This is not working. 2 more votes for Norris and Russell. It's going that way.
I think it's going that way.
It's going that way.
Norris and Russell can share it.
Yeah. Thanks, Discord. This is because of the fact that I turned up on my own. They've sided with me. It'll be back to normal next week. Don't worry.
All right. Last award.
Oh yeah, last award.
Honestly, what the are we doing here?
Well,
we sort of have to mention practice 3.
Yeah.
When we had both Stroll and Leclerc basically driving into another car to make a point out of frustration, and both getting, I think they both got a reprimand for it.
Yeah.
Which was bizarre. I mean, they were bizarre incidents in the first place, and the fact that 2 of them happened within a few minutes of each other.
Yeah.
And the fact that they were basically went unpunished. Very odd.
Yeah. I mean, my suggestion was going to be Muggins here causing predictions to close an hour earlier than they should have.
Yep, that didn't go down too well.
That's definitely a W2F moment. So sorry to anyone that affected that didn't get to send an email or a message in time. Those of you who did, I've managed to add them manually for you, so you're welcome.
Nice.
But yeah, apologies to anyone that affected. But that's my WTF. But I think in terms of a real WTF, the essentially deciding that you're gonna bump into someone on purpose out of it reminds me of, like, not quite the same, but very similar to the Vettel Hamilton thing in Baku all those years ago, where they essentially, like, were brake testing each other and bumping into each other and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it probably would go to that, if I'm honest.
Yeah, it was a pretty quiet weekend for bonker stuff other than that, really. Yeah, I think it's going to have to be that.
Yeah, I can go with that.
Cool.
Oh
yeah, there was the guy that tried to give the Constructors' Trophy to Lewis on the podium as well, and he had to like, not me, mate, it's down that way.
Yeah, that was funny. Right, shall I run us through predictions? Because we've kind of got quick bit to get through in terms of Spain, and then we've got to, like, jump to storylines and do predictions for Austria, because it's one of those double header weeks. So let's rattle through that. All right weekend for you, Chris, really, overall. The non on the DNF and the 20 finishes worked out well. So now it's a nice, like, double point bag, that, isn't it, when you do get it right? But yeah, so Verstappen win, and then those 2 for you. Stu and I just got a single point each for a Verstappen win, because it's an easy one usually these days. However, slightly better from the listeners who were able to submit predictions. Jacob Whitaker and Tones 1029 both scored 4 points. Slightly different combinations. Tones got Lando as fastest qualifier, whereas Jacob got Gasly's position right in 9th. So the rest of it was the same, similar to you, but the other 2, the extra point came from, like, somewhere else for both of them. In terms of the overall standings, Steen Nielsen still leads the way with 25 points, and then there's now 3 people tied behind Steen in second. So there's Gordon Barham, Ryan Connors, and Tom Pennant are all tied behind Steen, so it's pretty close up there at the top. Jumping over to the F1 Fantasy League, RX Racers was this week's winner with 350 points, but our leader overall is Ricky Bobby Racing with 2,391 points. And then over on the Grid Rival Fantasy League, Black Flag Racer is this week's overall winner with 957 points, but Mighty Hawk 44 leads the season standing still with 9,683 points. If you want to get involved with any of that, then head to backofthegrid.com, there's all the stuff for predictions, including obviously being able to see this week's results and then also start submitting stuff for Austria. There's also a little section on there for the fantasy leagues where you can get a link out to the F1 Fantasy League or the Grid Rival League, and you can find out about joining both of those and submit your teams into those leagues as well. I guess that's it for a quick whirlwind stop there. Should we do some Austria storylines and then look at Preds for Austria?
Yeah, we'll do a rapid run through of Austria. And actually quite an interesting one, I think, going into this weekend, because it is another sprint this weekend, which obviously means...
I keep forgetting.
Yes.
Obviously
means a limited amount of practice.
Wow.
Only one practice session.
In a triple header weekend.
Yeah.
Do we have one in Britain this year?
No, I don't believe we do. I think
Probably the best.
Yeah, I think definitely. The next one is it's not Spa. It's not Zandvoort. That would be awful.
Oof.
Where is the next sprint? Austin is the next sprint.
Okay, so we've got a nice little gap at least until another one.
However, back to my point, sprint weekend means only one practice session, which obviously means a lack of setup time, which is going to, I think, hurt some teams more than others. Which I bring up because I think a pattern that has sort of started to form this season is Red Bull starting weekends a bit slowly, a bit on the back foot, and not really necessarily getting in the window until practice 2, practice 3 qualifying.
Yeah.
So, bit of pressure on them to get it right and not have such a slow start this weekend.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because otherwise you're going to end up with a maybe not quite as bad as Monaco, but a Monaco type situation where they're off the pace in quali and therefore off the pace in general and not able to recover from it. Obviously, I think Monaco's a little bit of an exception in the sense that it's just so difficult to pass there. So once they were off the pace in quali, it didn't really matter what they did for race pace, to be brutally honest with you. They were always a bit scuppered there. And I think a circuit like this will at least not have those problems. It's very possible to overtake in Austria. Over the years, you essentially see an overtake at pretty much every apex over the course of a race. It's a very good circuit for that. I think the only one where you don't generally see an out-and-out overtake is the last two that kind of link together going on to the back straight because they're just so fast. But for the majority of the rest of the circuit, we've seen people maybe not necessarily pull off moves, but at least be in a good enough position to attempt them. So I think you kind of see overtakes around the circuit. So I don't think they'll be compromised anywhere near as much as Monaco. But
that's a good point.
It's, it still will make life a lot more difficult for them, and especially with the way Perez has been lately.
And
it's another one of those, isn't it?
And a point I've made in the past, which I'll make again, modern racetracks seem to be getting longer and longer, certainly in Formula One. Whereas you come to somewhere at Austria, barely over a minute lap, it means you do way more laps, so you go through the corners you can overtake on way more times than you would on a Spa, a Silverstone, a Jeddah, wherever.
Very true.
So that definitely helps as well.
Yeah.
Couple more storylines. Will McLaren be the team to beat? They've generally always gone well at this track.
It's been all right for them in the past.
Their results over the last sort of 3-4 seasons, it's tended to be one of the better ones. It was where Norris got his first podium in 2020, I think that was. 2021?
It was COVID year, wasn't it? I think it was when we had Styrian
races,
Styrian and Austrian together, so it was 2020,
Yeah. And then the last one of interest is, will Mercedes keep up the momentum they've got, and can they stay the third best car, or are Ferrari going to close that gap?
I want to hope and want to think, let's say, that Ferrari will at least be giving the rest of them a bit more of a run for their money than they did in Barcelona, hopefully.
Also,
do you know what? I'm not necessarily going to go down specifically to the exact times here, but with how close we've seen the grid in recent races, I'm gonna go for that something like the top 10, maybe even going down to Q2 times for some of it, like maybe in the top 15, are going to be within half a second of each other. I think it's going to be that close. Like, you're going to have like less than a second separating the whole grid, I think, almost for certain. Like, might even be less than half a tenth in Q1 for the whole. In Q3, for the whole lot of them. Like, it's going to be really tight. And I think that is maybe what is harming Ferrari a little bit, is the fact that although they had good one-lap pace, they have maybe been caught up in that regard. And it's highlighting the comparative lesser race pace because everybody else started to close that gap and quality's got so tight in general that Ferrari have lost what was their one hot lap advantage that it felt like they had, and now everybody else is kind of on pace with them there. It's getting a little bit more mixed up, and then the slight lack of race pace to some degree is becoming a little bit more prominent because it's harder for them to fight back up if they do qualify kind of further down. Whereas when they've got clearer air in front of them and it was just like Max disappearing off, they were a little bit more capable of just kind of managing the pace at the race at their own pace and keeping people behind. And I think it's turned the head on it a little bit. So it'll be very interesting to see where they fit in based off that. But yeah, I think less than half a second separating the top 15 cars is going to be my guess.
I can see that for sure. Right, should we make some predictions?
Yeah, let's give it a go. Fastest in Q3. Have you got anything to put forward on this, Chris?
Norris.
Okay, that scuppers my plan then. That's what I was going to say. I think he's on form, and I think the car goes well here. And it's going to be tight. So I'm just going to go with him, same as you. Do we know if Stu's submitted anything? We don't?
We've not heard from Stu, unfortunately.
Sad. We'll go without Stu's then for now. Okay, so we'll go to win then on that case. Do you think Norris can see it out and grab another win this season?
I do.
Oh, so do I.
I've stolen your idea.
Oh, this is going to be the most boring set of predictions ever. First DNF. Okay, I'll go first this time.
All right.
I'm going to say... I'm going to go with Alonso again. I feel like the Aston Martin's not performing the way he wants it to, and it's going to just lead to him being frustrated and either retiring under a mechanical or just getting caught up in something from being out of position, let's say, not in quote marks.
Yeah. It's a track that like really punishes mistakes and offs.
True.
So
the curbs. The curbs have been bad here for years.
Definitely someone who's having a bit of a struggle with their car at the moment. It feels obvious to say Sargent, but I think I am going to say Sargent for this one.
Okay. Number of finishes is always a bit of a tough one here because it's an interesting circuit that can punish cars, but they've sort of done a lot of work to improve the curbs over the years since the year where we just constantly saw the curbs rattling the cars to pieces.
A lot more gravel these days, though.
True. I'm going to go with 18 here. Maybe 1 or 2 retirements, but not too many. About you?
I'll go 1 less than you.
1 less finisher or 1 less retirement?
1 less finisher. I'll have 17. Please.
Okay. And then random driver, who are we on this week, Chris?
Random driver is Chuck Leclerc.
Ooh, that is tough. I'm just going to throw it straight out there and say 4th. I'm just going straight for that.
I think that is a bit high.
Oh, so you essentially think Mercedes will retain 3rd best? That's what you're saying, essentially.
Essentially, yeah. Will Piastri beat the Ferraris?
I mean, I'm seeing it as Max and Norris on the podium. Even if my double Norris doesn't come off, I'm seeing Max and Norris on the podium, and then a combination of one of the Mercs or Piastri being the other spot on the podium, and then Leclerc's sort of in amongst them. That's kind of like a very mixed up third, fourth, fifth, sixth.
Yeah,
between the teammates. I think. Okay. I feel like we're in the right sort of spot. He says. Famous last words. Right, that is it. That is our predictions. If you want to get involved, as I said earlier, head to backofthegrid.com. I promise this week I will check the time and I'll make sure I am around and available to change it should there be any issues. If you do ever have an issue with the Predictions League, as a lot of people kind of already know from many years ago when we've had like similar issues, just drop us an email through the contact form and let us know what you're trying to do and what's wrong, and we'll get on it and sort it as quick as we can. So thanks to those people who did get in touch and let us know that it wasn't working right. Sorry we couldn't fix it quick enough, but hopefully you all know what to do for next time if there ever is a problem. Right, should we do a little bit of inbox?
Yes.
Okay.
Keep me saying now. But stay on. Box. Hey, man.
First one from Tom Murray, who says, Ciao, amico. I mean, I should know this. You've just been in Italy. Ciao, amico.
I think that's the joke.
If Lando can manage to squeeze a couple of wins out of the next few rounds, do you think he can turn this championship into a genuine battle, or do you think Max has already won?
I think because there's a little bit of inconsistency in who is pushing for the... I mean, to be fair, though, in recent races, actually, having said that, it's kind of always been Norris, hasn't it? Like, we've seen a few back and forth now where Norris has obviously picked up a win or been coming home quite close behind Verstappen. So maybe we're about to see a little bit of a trend of them two being the 1-2 for a little while. I mean, I kind of hope, as dull as it ends up being, I kind of hope that that's the case, in the sense that it means that's the most apparent way someone will be able to... Like, in order to take the fight to Max Verstappen, this is the point I'm trying to get to eventually. In order to take the fight to Max Verstappen, you need somebody who is constantly finished second behind him when he wins and being the person to take the win when he doesn't.
Yeah.
You've got to have that. Having Leclerc win one here and Sainz win one there and Norris win another one here will ultimately give Verstappen the title, because he will win the races that those two or three people do not. So as much as it would be more boring, it depends on what you want. Do you want excitement race on race, which I guess that does kind of give you, or do you want a definitive title fight, I guess? And if you want a definitive title fight, you need Norris to be constantly coming home second behind Verstappen and then also throwing in wins to beat him, which sounds duller than having Ferraris pop up and the Mercedes pop up and stuff like that, but it's the only way you'll get a title fight, I think. So give it... Let's see how this run of three goes that we're in now. If Norris picks up a win and another second, for argument's sake, and start sort of finding a way to keep that gap and really push Max, yeah, he might be able to take the fight to him. But it 100% relies on Norris essentially constantly finishing second behind Max when he's not winning, and then also winning more. Which it'd be great if in the season that he picked up his first win, he can push for a title fight. That would be like absolutely a nice little story to it, I guess. But until I see it starting to come to fruition, I can't look past Max overall.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Okay, next one. Sarah says, hey man, with Briatore making his way back into an F1 team, how can we judge him so much harder than we do Pat Simmons? Both of them got the initial ban from the sport for the involvement in Crashgate. And while I agree that Briatore should not be involved in any team, can't that be said about Pat Simmons as well?
Yeah, so Flavio Briatore has been appointed executive director to the Alpine team. Which, I mean, in and of itself, Alpine as a team are struggling for credibility as it is at the moment. So I don't think this is helping. Sarah does make a really interesting point. Like, Briatore and Pat Simmons were, for what I remember, pretty equally accountable for Crashgate.
I think so, yeah.
And yeah, like Pat Simmons, they both were initially banned from the sport in 2000.
Oh wait, when they were banned.
So they were originally banned in 2010. Then both of them reached now, of course, settlement with the FIA, which allowed them to return to the sport. And yes, so since then, Pat Simmons, he was consultant for Virgin Racing for a while. Then he was CTO at Williams. He did a bit of time with Sky F1, and then he joined Formula One as their chief technical officer, which he did until recently. And then now it's been announced that he's joined the Andretti F1 bid team. Which actually is a lot more stuff than Flavio has done. This is the first. I mean, Flavio Briatore carried on being a manager. I believe he's still Alonso's manager, and possibly some other drivers. Discord is saying Pat Simmons got a shorter ban. I can't remember off the top of my head if that's correct or not. That may well be right. I think with Pat Simmons, the roles he has come back to take, particularly working for F1 on technical regulations and stuff, is almost sort of a penance for his crimes, almost. Like he's come back to... He came back and did something that was serving of the sport, whereas I think Flavio has always very much been kind of protesting his innocence and just carrying on being exactly the same person, trying to do exactly the same things. And I think maybe that's where there's a difference. But it is an interesting point that Sarah makes, that like surely if you don't think one should be involved, then that should apply to both of them.
I suppose it depends on what level they were both. I can't remember to what level they were both deemed accountable for what happened with Crashgate. So I couldn't, on the spot here right now, answer it and say, well, you know, Pat was only partially responsible in this sense compared to Flavio, who was like, you know, involved to this level. I couldn't sit here and honestly answer that part of it, but I imagine from what I remember of like what Discord mentioned about him maybe getting a shorter ban and things like that, and then like you say, the bits that he's already done back around the sport over the more recent years, it does sort of feel like he was less accountable for what happened, I guess, and was more of a unfortunate passenger who maybe didn't do enough to stop something he knew was wrong than orchestrated something that was wrong, if that makes sense. It feels a lot more like Flavio was the orchestrator of it and Pat was kind of being held accountable for not stepping in to do something to stop it. Does that make sense?
At a very quick scan of the story of this, Briatore was given a lifetime ban. Pat Simmons was given a 5-year ban.
Okay.
And the World Motorsport Council said part of that difference was Briatore just denied all involvement despite evidence saying he did, whereas Pat Simmons was very much... He confessed everything. He expressed regret and shame for it, and I mean, I think that made, and I think in the court of public opinion, that makes a big difference as well.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you only have to look at crime and punishment in general. Like, if you go into a courtroom charged with a crime, confess guilt, and show some remorse, generally speaking, the sentence will be more lenient on you because there is remorse shown and there's an element of change to be made. And I think, I mean, it is a crime, essentially, what happened, I guess. Not, you know, like it's a breaking of the legal rules of the sport, however you want to put it. But like, I think there's definitely got to be an element of that. And then coming back in and doing what he's done for the wider sport, whereas Flavio just feels like he's in it for himself. And like you say, he's still to this day never really turned around and said, yeah, I hold my hands up, what I did was wrong, but, you know, I've learned from it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and So I think, while I get Sarah's point, I do disagree with a bit of holding them both to exactly the same standards just because of the way they both handled it. I think it shows very different characters, and I've got a lot more time for Pat Simmons' character from what I've seen of him in and around the sport since, whereas Flavio, I've never seen anything that felt any different or any remorse or anything like that. So, yeah, uneasy about him being back, less bothered about Pat Simmons. I mean, to be fair, for what Pat Simmons has done for the sport in the last few years and over recent years, I'd not forgotten about his involvement in Crashgate, but it had kind of replaced the negative connotation of his name with more positive ones and other thoughts, whereas Flavio has just always been Flavio and will always be the guy that orchestrated an intentional crash. So, yeah, I think that's the difference for me.
Yeah. Last couple of questions to get through. First from Kilowog, who says, with all the silly season gossip, why is Felipe Drugovich not discussed as a potential option given his pedigree as F2 champion and the money he brings?
Sounds like someone may have listened to me complain about the youth system last episode.
Yeah. I think... I feel like Felipe Drugovich and or his management have not made great choices since his F2 title. Obviously, he got... Because at the time of the F2 title, he didn't have any affiliation with an F1 team, which is unheard of these days. Aston Martin stepped in and snapped him up, which is good. However, there's just... It became clear very quickly there is no sign of an opening in that team. Stroll's not going anywhere. Alonso is basically the entire team right now. And they seem to have taken the approach of, if we sit there within a Formula One team for long enough, a seat will open up for you. And I just don't think that was ever going to happen. So I think he would have been much better going off and doing Super Formula, IndyCar, WEC, whatever it may be, to at least kind of keep himself in the spotlight a bit, because although he's there most weekends at races, I feel like he's kind of already been forgotten a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, his name's not come up at all recently, despite all the seat merry-go-round that we've been having in terms of people moving places, has it? Only when people like us have said, well, what's going to happen to Drugovich? Like, he's stuck with the Aston Martin Association and not really getting anything else out of it. I mean, I know he's done bits in Formula E in terms of testing. I thought he'd done something in IndyCar, but when I've literally just sense-checked it before I said it, it was because the Ed Carpenter team offered him a test, but he decided not to do it for whatever reason. So he's clearly got no immediate inclination to go do IndyCar, but he's done a few things within Formula E, so I would say that maybe that's where he's starting to set his eyes a little bit of trying to get an FE seat for next year. Yeah. Potentially.
He's done like 2 rounds of European Le Mans series this year.
Yeah, he's done a bit of that as well, hasn't he? Yeah.
And he was at Le Mans this year as well. He was driving one of the he was driving one of the Cadillacs with Jack Aitken.
Right, I didn't even notice his name.
Yeah, I didn't even realise he was there, to be honest. But yeah, I think he needs to just start leaning to other things, honestly, because, like I say, he's kind of a little bit forgotten, unfortunately.
Yeah, sadly so. And then last one for this week, Charlotte Taylor says, should incidents that happen in practice be given more lenient penalties than they are in the race? Surely hitting someone on purpose is dangerous, whether it's during the race or a practice session. So I guess I maybe read the first question with the wrong tone there. It was more, should they really be getting away with these lenient penalties in practices, rather than should they get more lenient penalties in practice? Two different tones, making it a different question.
Yeah. I think it depends on the incident, doesn't it? Like, there's a lot of things that, like, for example, if you get in someone's way when they're on a hot lap, in practice, you're going to get a slap on the wrist. In qualifying, it's a much bigger thing. You're going to get properly penalised for it. So I do think having different penalties for the same incident in practice is and should be a thing. Up to a point.
Yeah, I think I think, like you say, sort of impeding somebody's lap time has a serious effect in qualifying. Whilst doing it in a free practice session, yes, it inconveniences that driver a little bit, but at that point, depending on which practice session you're in, you're still all trying to just find where you can push, where you can't, where you can let people by, where you can't. Like, and I know the professional racing drivers, they visit these tracks every year. They probably already know good places to do that, but there's an element of everybody's bedding themselves in during practice sessions. That, you know, the clue is in the name, they're practice sessions.
Yeah.
But intentionally bashing into someone's car and then also flagrantly admitting that you did that because you were frustrated.
That's the most bizarre thing.
That to me, I mean, that sort of highlights the problem with Stroll in general for me is like the whole thing when he hit Danny Ricciardo in China, and throughout it all, literally talking to every camera and saying, "Oh yeah, the guy just braked in front of me, and there was nowhere I could go." Like, just the absolute disregard for the fact that it could have ever been his fault. It feels like he just thinks he can do what he wants, and his seat will always be safe because his dad. Like, there needs to be some more serious consequences for him within the team, because I genuinely don't think he would do what he does and drives like he does, were his dad not the team owner and essentially having the ultimate say as to whether he's there or not. And I don't think, unfortunately, Lawrence Stroll is ever going to be tough enough to turn around, unless some major shareholders basically said, "We are out if you keep that kid in the car." He is not going to turn around and take his son out of it. I mean, Sarah's pointing out in chat, like, the whole incident with his trainer where he physically pushed him or whatever it was, like, almost similar to the Verstappen Ocon incident. But, it's... I don't know. I think stuff like that, which is just a flagrant disregard for the rules and not caring, should definitely be punished the same as if it was a race or qualifying or whatever. I think, the little things like, you know, trying to find the boundaries of the track and see where you can push, impeding to some degree, as long as it's not completely unsafe. If it's more just you hinder someone's lap time, but it's not unsafe, if you're slowing down and almost brake checking someone who's on a hot lap, again, it's that other end of the nuance, isn't it, where there's like a disregard for the other person's safety and what's going on around, I think, to some degree.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to find the line as to which things you police the same and which things you give more leniency to, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely think that the two incidents in practice that we talked about should have been penalised harsher than they were.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to go back to the example you used earlier, I think when Vettel did in Baku, Vettel hitting Hamilton under the safety car, I think a very similar thing, but in a race situation, I think was right to be penalised even harsher. And equally, I think if that had happened at racing speed, it should have been penalised even more harshly. So there's definitely degrees of the same kind of incident, but I think the minimum was too low in this situation.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think some of that wants looking at least to
for sure
to not let drivers get away with that sort of stuff in practice, because you know what'll start happening is they'll all. I mean, actually, no. I'll take that comment back before I say it. I was going to clearly say they'll all be at it, but I think the vast majority of the drivers on the grid have actually got enough common sense and respect for each other. They wouldn't be that stupid.
Definitely, yeah.
There's obviously a couple of them that have got that in them and would potentially do that, as we've already seen. But yeah, it just gives those drivers a license to behave inappropriately in the car, which is just not safe. So, yeah.
Right, I think that just about wraps us up for this week. So thank you, everybody, as always, for joining us. We'll be back in a week's time to review the Austrian Grand Prix. If you want to get in touch with us in the meantime, we are in all the usual places, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of that stuff. You can also go to backofthegrid.com where there's a contact form, and you can also check out where you are in the Predictions League at the same time. Reminder that because it's a sprint weekend, we will be closing predictions on... I can never remember the new format.
It's before sprint quali starts.
Yes. So predictions will be closing at 3:30 p.m. UK time on Friday, not the usual Saturday.
So when it closes early this time, it's on purpose.
Yes. So yes, please don't forget to do that. If you want to see how you can get involved with our lovely little Discord community, you can go to patreon.com/backofthegrid and all the info for that is there. If you're on YouTube, please do give us a like and a subscribe. You can also drop questions in the comments below. We always check those before episodes. So if you want to drop a question there, we'll grab that for the next recording. But I think that's everything. So until next week, thanks again for joining us and goodbye.
Bye, everyone.